Welcome. My name is Sandy Rylander, and just want to tell you a little bit about my background. I graduated from UC Berkeley and then started with IBM, worked for IBM for about 8 years, and then started my own training company teaching Lotus, WordPerfect, and DOS. Shortly after that, I started working with the Microsoft Office suite, and the main reason I did was because I fell in love with Excel and what an amazing program it is. And formulas and functions are part of what makes it so amazing. It does all the work for you, and instead of you having to work for it. Formulas and functions are not difficult to learn. We are going to learn formulas first and then functions. And you may ask yourself, what is the difference between a formula and a function? Well, a formula is sort of the same as what you learned when you went through school. You would say 1 + 1 = 2, and that would be a formula. Only in Excel, instead of saying 1 + 1 =, what you're going to do is you're going to start out with an equal sign. Whether you're working with a formula or a function, you will always start with an equal sign. And your formulas, though, are to do things like calculations, like adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. And then when we go into functions, you'll see that it will make it easier to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, but we'll also add a host of other things like being able to test for things, doing logical tests. For instance, maybe I only want to add these numbers if the numbers include, if a number is ice cream. So maybe I only want to say $1,000 if ice cream is in the first column, something to that effect. So you can do logical tests. You can do all sorts of different testing with functions. Like I said, that we are going to start out with formulas. And so if you happen to have printed out my book before starting class, we are on page 1, and it talks about formulas. It talks about the fact that they always start with an equal sign. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click in the cell that I would like to see the formula. And after I click in that cell, the first thing, remember I told you a formula always starts with an equal sign. So I'm going to type in an equal sign, okay? And the reason I clicked in this cell is because that's where I would like the answer to appear. So you always click where you want the answer to appear, and then you type in your equals. Now at this point, you may want, if you want to add this column, you could say, I want to add 1,000, and then plus 900, plus 800, plus 700. That is a perfect formula. It's 1,000 plus 900 plus 800 plus 700. So all we have to do now is press enter. Before I press enter, I want to show you that not only, even though I typed it in the cell, you're seeing the formula not only in the cell itself, but notice you're seeing it appear in what Excel calls the formula bar. So whether you type it up here or down here makes no difference. It's exactly the same thing. And so now I can either press enter on my keyboard if I'd like, or do you see this little checkbox here? When I hover over the checkbox, notice it says enter. So if I'd like to enter it that way, I can do that as well, just by clicking, and it gives me 3,400. Now, that worked great, but the problem is if I change this 1,000 to 2,000, you would assume that this would change to 4,400, right? And the problem is it didn't. It stayed 3,400. Why? Because we would also have to come into this formula and change this to 2,000 in order to keep everything up to date. And that's why when I teach formulas, I always try and tell people don't use numbers if you can in formulas, but rather use cell addresses. A cell address.
There's some questions here over on finding the book. There is a handout section in the on GoToWebinar. It can be downloaded there. So that whole PDF is available for anybody to download.
Thank you. Okay, so we just noticed that when we changed our data, we had to change our formula. And the whole idea behind a formula is that it will work regardless of how many times you want to change your data. So we don't want to use numbers, if possible, in our formula at all. What we want to use are cell addresses. So a cell address is the combination of a row letter and a column letter and a row number. So this would be cell address B5. And if you don't know what a cell address is or what this one is, all you have to do is look up here in this name box, and it'll tell you exactly what cell you're looking at. It's always the column first, which is B, followed by the row, which is 5. And notice when I click in this, do you notice how B and 5 are both highlighted? So that's another way for you to know. So instead of using the numbers, I'm going to delete this and start all over, still using an equal sign. And what I can do is I can type in B5 if I want, but I'd like to show you another method of entering a formula, and that is what I call the point and click method. So I've just typed in an equals, and now I'm just going to click on the number that I would like to add, and notice that it automatically puts the cell address in for me. I don't have to do it at all. So then all I have to do is type in a plus and click on the next cell address. Type in a plus and click on the next one. Plus and the next one. So notice that Excel is doing something else really nice for us. It is highlighting each of the different cells that I've got in my formula, and it's color coding them. B5 is blue and B5 is blue, so you can see exactly what it's adding. Now, what a lot of people do when they're first learning about formulas is they make the mistake of adding an extra plus. You don't want that there because it then expects you to add yet another cell. But a lot of people make that mistake, and so they press enter at this point, and I just want you to see what happens. You get an error message. And a lot of people get afraid when they see an error message and they feel like no sounds less harmful than yes, so they click on no before they've even read it. I encourage you to read this error message because it says, we found a typo in your formula and we tried to correct it to not having the plus at the end. Do you want to accept this correction? So yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. I'll accept that correction, and now it's right. Now the cool thing is, notice it says 4,400, and now if I change this back to being 1,000, do you see how now it becomes 3,400? So by using cell addresses, automatically it will change the answer every time I change my data, which is always our goal. You want to be able to change your data without changing your formula, okay? All right, so we've got equals B5 plus B6 plus B7 plus B8. Now, a lot of people try and just do equals B5 plus B8 and think that somehow that's going to work. If you do that, you're going to end up with 1,700. It's going to do B5 plus B8. Okay? Now, a lot of you are probably saying, wow, that's really tedious. If I need to add a column of 1,000 numbers, I think I'm going to go crazy. Well, that's why Excel has functions. We're going to show you a function in a minute that will allow you to add what's called a range of cells, where you will be able to say, just add A5 through A8, okay? Before we do that, however, excuse me, I would like this formula to be in all of these other cells, because I've got a lot of other columns that need to be added, okay? So one way to do that you probably already know is you can copy and paste it. I can click on copy. Notice that I get a little marquee around. The marquee is this little border around the outside. And then I can highlight where I'd like to copy it to and press enter. Now, some of you may say, well, why didn't you do paste? Well, let me hit undo. And notice that as soon as you hit copy, if you look down here at the bottom of your screen, do you see where it says select destination and press enter or choose paste? You can choose paste. I could click paste right now, but if I do, what happens when I click paste is this marquee stays put. So then I have to get rid of the marquee, and I can do that by pressing enter or pressing escape or something. But the reason that you would press paste instead of pressing enter is because you want to copy it again. If I want to paste it again, excuse me, if you want to paste it again, I can keep pasting and pasting and pasting if I want to, as long as I hit paste instead of pressing enter. But if my goal is just to paste one time, the easiest way to do that is to highlight and just press enter, and your marquee goes away. Now, another way of copying this to the other cells is in the bottom right-hand corner. Do you see this? In the bottom right-hand corner of this cell, do you see how my mouse pointer changes from what I call a fat plus to what I call a thin plus? That is a very special corner of your cell. It's called the fill handle. And when you have a fill handle, which is the bottom right corner, I can just drag this across, and look at that. It automatically fills. So it doesn't copy, so I can't just copy from here to here, but it fills, meaning that every single cell along the way will get that same formula. Any questions so far? Okay, so then I have a question for you. Do you remember that what we did was we said B5 plus B6 plus B7 plus B8 equals 3,400? If what I have in this cell is B5 plus B6 plus B7 plus B8, then why is it not 3,400? If it truly copied from this cell to all these other cells, then they should really all say 3,400, but they don't. Why? Well, if you were here in class, I could see your answers, but since I can't, I will tell you that a lot of people at this point start guessing. And I would prefer that in Excel, you never guess as to why something happens, but rather look. Now, how can you look? Well, all you have to do is click in the cell that you're wondering about. So if we don't know what formula is actually in this cell, click on it. So I click on it, and look at that. Instead of B5 plus B6 plus B7, etc., it says C5. Look at that. It's in column C. When I come over here, it says D. It's in column D. E is in column E. So instead of copying the way I asked it to do, it actually increased the letter of the column. How is that possible? Well, because Excel knows that if it didn't, then copy and paste would be worthless. And you also couldn't move easily. If I can't copy this formula over here and have it change relative to where I'm going to paste it, if instead it stays static, if it doesn't change relative to where I'm going to paste it, then I can't really use the copy, can I? I would have to go in and type that formula in into each cell. So what Excel does is it has, as its default, it's going to always make your cell addresses, your B's, your C's, it's always going to make it relative to where you copy it. So as I copy to the right, it's going to make it relatively larger. It's going to go A, B, C. If I go the reverse direction, watch. I'm going to delete these, and notice this is going to say M. See that? M across. If I now bring this fill handle backwards, it's going to go from M to L to K. So relatively speaking, it's always going to be correct. So this is needed not just for copying, but moving. What if I take this whole thing and I move it down here? If this were still to say B5 plus B6 plus B7, then it would be completely worthless to me, wouldn't it? So it better say what? It better say B14 plus B15 plus B16. Let's see if it does. Or excuse me, in the E, because I moved it over to E. It not only moved down, but it also moved across. So it changed these to being across to E and down to 14. Okay? All right, I'm going to undo that. Does anybody have any questions about relative cell addressing? Okay, we'll see how that goes in the rest of the training. Now, remember before, I'm going to go ahead and delete these. Remember before I said if this were, let's just make this a little longer. If this were a little longer, I had more cells to add. If you had to say equals B5 plus B6 plus B7 plus B8, you soon would no longer be using Excel. So let me take away some of these dollar signs real quick. We'll leave it, it doesn't matter. But anyway, so what we're going to do is learn another way of adding, which is using a function. Now, functions are the same as formulas in that they start with an equal sign. But instead of then just going to a cell address, you put a function name. So for instance, to add, the function name is sum. So we're going to type in sum, and look at that. As soon as I start typing, even the S, when I do an equals S, it starts to show me every single function that starts with S. If I type in SU, it starts with SU. If I do SUM, it's to equal sum. And if you say, gosh, I don't really know what sum does, notice that when you land on it, it says it adds all the numbers in a range of cells. That sounds pretty good. Now, all functions start with an equals, then it has the function name, and then you need a left parentheses. Once you type in the left parentheses, it'll tell you what it needs next. And so equals sum next needs a range of numbers to add. So how do we put in a range? One way of putting in a range really easily is to just drag across the range that you would like to put in. Remember that point and click method. This time we're going to point and drag. So I'm going to hold my left mouse button down, starting at B5, going all the way down to B27, but being careful not to hit B28. You don't want to add the sum to itself. You want to stay one short of where your function is. Okay? Now this is supposed to end with a ending parentheses, but if you leave it out, Excel will be smart enough to add it for you. So how does Excel express a range? Well, it expresses a range by putting in a semicolon. Do you see that? You didn't even have to do that. Simply by dragging, it says B5 through, which is a colon, B27. So I'm saying equals, then I'm saying add, within parentheses, B5 through B27. All I have to do now is press enter or click on the enter up here, and boom, it has added all of these. Now, these are all negatives down here. You see these negative 100, so that's why we're getting such small numbers. So let me go ahead and delete this part so that you can see it with just positive numbers, so it's easier for you to add. So once again, I'm going to do equal sum. Then what? Well, if you were here, I'm sure you would say left parentheses, then drag across the range. Okay? And remember I said then you could just press enter because it'll put the right parentheses in for you. 5,500. If you want to cross-check, if I just drag across these numbers, let's look down here at the status bar. Do you see on the status bar when I drag across that area, do you see how it says sum is 5,500? So that would be a way of cross-checking to make sure that you did it right. Okay? So once again, at this point, well, let's do it one more time. Let's do equals, and then the function name, sum, left parentheses, drag, being really careful not to go on top of the 15, just staying back here and pressing enter. Okay, let's double check again. I'm going to highlight that, come down here, 15,500 looks perfect. Okay, so now if I want, I can drag this across and I'm getting all of my columns added. So you may say, Sandy, why did you even teach us a function, excuse me, a formula, when a function is so much faster? And the reason is because you can't always use a function. For instance, if I wanted to say equals this plus this plus this, there's really no function for that, right? Or it might be this plus this minus this, or it might be multiplication. By the way, multiplication looks like this asterisk. So that's when you need to use a formula, is when you're doing addition, subtraction, multiplication, all of those sorts of things, okay? So you need to learn both formulas and functions. Okay, so let's go back and review some of the concepts that we've learned by, I'm going to type in tax here. So we want to know what the tax is going to be on $5,500, okay? So what I want to do is I want to type in the tax rate, which where I live is 10%. So I'm going to just type in 0.1 because that's 10%, okay? So this is a perfect example of where a function's not going to help you. We need to use a formula. So I'd love to ask if anybody knows what the formula should be, but I don't know. I'm told I can ask. So does anybody know what the formula should be here? First of all, what do I need to start with? Can anybody answer? Because we can see what your answers are here.
Yeah, if you type it into the questions, we can see it. We've got equals. That's what most people are answering.
Equals is great. You guys are great. What next?
B15 star A17. So the cell addresses.
That's brilliant. So what I did was, after the equals, I clicked on B15. Then I did multiplication, which is an asterisk, and then I clicked in A17. That looks good. That will give me just the tax, right? So I'm going to press enter, and then and that looks perfect too, right? $550. So then what I'm going to do is just drag that fill handle across. Oh, that doesn't look very good. What went wrong? Can anybody tell me what went wrong? Okay, somebody has taken this class before. So again, if you don't know what went wrong, don't guess, look. Now remember up here, I told you that it changed, relative cell addressing changed the B to the C to the D, right? So when I come down here, it's going to change the B15 to the C15 to the D15, which is perfectly okay. That's what we want. But the reason we're getting nothing in all of these is what happens when it changes the A17 to B17 to C17. You're multiplying this number times 0 and this number times 0. Let's see if that's exactly what happened. So for the first one, it's great. And if I double click on it, look at this. It's even telling me it's multiplying this times this, and I'm happy. So I go ahead and press enter or press escape, either way. And I'm going to come over here and double click and do the same thing. And look at that. If you don't know, just double click on the cell and it's going to highlight. It's highlighting the fact that it moved over here, which we love, but it didn't here, which we don't like. Okay? I'm pressing escape, double clicking over here. So again, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which is making the cell addresses relative to where you move them. The problem is, in this case, we don't want this one to move. We want it to stay put. So what we have to do is we have to click on the cell with the formula, and we can either correct it here or in the cell. It doesn't matter. But we need to make it stay put. And what the person who answered absolute cell addressing or making this absolute is exactly what we need to do. Now, to make something absolute, there's two parts to this address. There's the A and there's the 17. If we want to make them both absolute, we put a $sign in front of the A, and we put a $sign in front of the 17. Notice how long that took me, however. So Excel is nice enough to say, if you position anywhere your insertion point anywhere within that address, and you press the F4 function key, F as in Frank 4, you press the F4 function key, and notice it automatically puts the $signs around the A and the 17. That means it's going to make sure that the column doesn't change and the row doesn't change. In this case, do we care about the column changing? It won't change, will it? Because we're going across. The only thing that we don't want to change is the column. It's not going to change the row. So yes, you could leave it like this if you want, but look what happens when I press F4 again. Now it's saying the row can't change, but the column can. Well, that's exactly the reverse of what we need. What we really need is A to always stay A. So if I press my F4 again, look at that. Now it's only going to keep the A stable. And that's really all we need. But let's hit it one more time and you'll see all of the absolute go away. So if I keep hitting this until just the A is stable, and I press enter, now if I drag this across, do you see it works beautifully? Why? Because the first one says A17, the second one better say A17, the third one says A17, so they're all A17, and the only thing that's relative is the B15, C15, etc. So that's the difference between relative and absolute cell addressing. So crucial, and so many people don't understand this concept and completely mess up their worksheet. So it's incredibly important to understand. I have a question.
So the question was, what happens if you use brackets around A17?
Then you do, and it changes nothing. Brackets is, but the question is a great question for a different reason. Brackets help you with the order of operations. And let's look at that for a second, because that's also in my book. So let's say that what we want to do here is we want to not just have the tax, which is what we have here, right? We have just the tax, but we want the tax, we want it to add the tax to this 5,500. We want to see the total including the tax. So then our formula is equals, okay, this, well, actually before we do that, let's do something a little bit easier. Let's do a really easy formula. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do equals 5 plus 2 times 3. Who can tell me what the answer to 5 plus 2 times 3 is? Please type it in your questions area. The answer to 5 plus 2 times 3. Usually I get 3 answers. Let's see how many we get in this class.
We've got 11, 9, and 21.
Oh, look at that, 3 answers. 11, 9, and 21 is what you were telling me? Okay, so let's see how each of you got those answers. 21 is a really popular answer, generally speaking, because what most people do is they go from left to right. So they'll do 5 plus 2 is 7 times 3 is 21. Okay, looks logical. So we'll see about that one. The 11 was somebody did it backwards. Somebody said, let's do 2 times 3, which is 6 plus 5. So that is the 11. So that's how we got the 11. That's how we got the 21. And then the 9 is quite interesting. Not quite sure how somebody got the 9.
We also got a 30.
And we got a 30. Okay, so the 30 was probably somebody thought it was 5 times 2 times 3, not seeing that one of them was a plus sign and one of them's a multiplication symbol. So what is the right answer? Well, there is something in math called the order of operations. The order of operations says multiplication and division always come before addition and subtraction. So the person who said 9, who said 11, who did 2 times 3, which is 6, plus 5, getting 11, is correct, because multiplication and division always come before addition and subtraction. So what if you don't want to memorize that? What if you don't know that? Well, then look. What I would say is type it in, press enter, and you see what the answer is. It's 11. You should know the answer you're looking for. If the answer you're looking for isn't 11, if the answer you're looking for is 21, then what you need to do is, that's when the parentheses come into play. That's when you're saying, Excel, I don't care what math wants to do. I want it to do what I want it to do. So at that point, if you put in parentheses and say, hey, I want it to be 5 plus 2, 7, times 3, I put parentheses around what I want Excel to do first, then I press enter, then I get my 21. And that is a super important concept, which is again why it's in my book.
There's a comment here which is PEMDAS, so PMDAS, parentheses, multiplication, addition, subtraction, as a way to remember that order.
Yes. So what they're saying is something they learned back in probably elementary school or whatever to help. It's a word that helps you remember what anyway, exponents come first, and then multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, etc. So that's what they're saying to help you remember. But usually, I think for most of you, you're really only going to be dealing with multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So just remember multiplication, division come first. Okay? So let's see. Let's test that concept. Let's see what, a second ago I was saying, I would like the formula for calculating the tax and the total. So these two combined. So what would be my formula for that? I want to do equals, and then what? So I need to take this, right? Actually, what I want to take this, and then what? Does anybody know how to do this? I would multiply 1, right, plus 0.1, which is the tax, because the 1 is going to give me the number itself, right? You multiply anything times 1 and you're going to get the number. And then you want the extra 10%, so I'm going to add the 10%. But is this going to work? What's going to happen? Well, let's press enter and see. That's not quite right, is it? Why? Because what it did is it took B15 and multiplied it times 1, which gave us the 5,500, and then it added 10 cents. That isn't what we want. What we want is, we want it to take this and add it first, so that it's 1.1, right? So if we do that, it should look a lot better, and it does. So this is an example of when you want it to add first and then multiply, not multiply first and then add. So it's really important that you understand this order of operations, or if you don't, you can always put parentheses around whatever you want it to do first. It just, if you put it around something that's multiplying, it's going to happen on its own anyway, so you don't have to do it. So it'll save you time if you understand that the only time you need to use parentheses is when you need it to change the order of operations. Okay, any questions on that? Any questions on absolute versus relative cell addressing?
Is there a difference between the use of parentheses and brackets?
Yes. Brackets are for arrays and parentheses are for order of operations. So we definitely want to use parentheses when we're talking about these formulas. All right, so I'm going to delete all this now. Actually, I'm going to delete all this now. And now I'm going to add. So far, we've typed in everything ourselves. And once again, anytime anything seems cumbersome in Excel, there's a faster, better way to do it. And so one of the things that you do all the time is adding rows and columns. So Microsoft put this AutoSum tool right on the toolbar. So once again, I'm just clicking where I want the total to go, and I'm going to click on AutoSum means add. So I'm going to click on that, and boom, it just did everything for me. Typed in the equals, the sum, the parentheses, even was smart enough to put in the range. So why didn't I show you that first? Well, because it's really important for you to understand how to come up with this on your own, how to use these little helps, and understand how these ranges work. Why? Well, look at something that might not work as well. I'm going to delete this, come down here, click on AutoSum, and a lot of people might not notice that Excel, because there was a blank cell there, thought that it was doing the right thing, but in fact left out all these numbers. So it's really important when you click on the AutoSum that you always check to make sure it did the right thing. In this case, you have a couple ways of correcting it. You certainly can come in here and just type in a 5 instead of having it start at a 9 if you want. The other thing that you can do is, notice there's a little box in this upper right-hand corner. I can just drag it up. That'd be another way. Another way to make sure it does the right thing is don't give it a choice. What I mean by that is if I highlight this area plus this extra cell and then I click on AutoSum, I am forcing Excel to start at B5 through B14 because I highlighted it. I said, I don't care what you want to do. I'm telling you what to do. Okay? So let's go back to here. Now, again, a faster way yet is you can highlight all the cells that you'd like to be added and then click on the AutoSum. Okay? But sometimes people like to add not just the columns, but also the rows. If you want to do that, you can drag across the entire area, just add a row and add a column so that it knows where to put the totals, then click on AutoSum, and it just did it all for you in both directions. Okay, notice that? Now, what if you had multiple stores? Okay, I'm going to copy this and paste it here and paste it here. Let's say this is Seattle, San Francisco, and New York. And now what I want to do is I want to add all 3 stores. I want a grand total because each of these are sort of like subtotals, right? Let's do this a little faster here. Let's do them all at once, total and total. I don't know if you know, but if you highlight a bunch of cells like that, and instead of pressing enter after I type in total, if I press control enter, boom, I just put it in 2 different places at the same time. How cool is that? Okay, so I think most people, when they want to add all of these subtotals, what they would do is they would do equals, and then click on this, plus, click on this, plus, click on that. Is that correct? Absolutely. Is that tedious if you had 100 stores? Absolutely. So instead of doing that, if I want a grand total, if I select all these columns and an extra row for my grand total, and then I hit AutoSum, look at this. Excel is smart enough to do what you just did manually. It says equals sum, and then it says I'm going to add B39. Let me just double click on it so you can even see it more clearly. It's going to add this cell plus this cell plus this cell. So instead of taking minutes to do it. It took you all of a second to do. And that's why it's so cool to really learn what Excel can do for you. Now, the only function we've learned so far is equal sum. What if you want to get an average? Well, that's what the drop down arrow here is for. If I click on this down arrow, look at that. It's not just summing, which is adding. There's averaging, there's counting, finding the maximum and the minimum, and tons more different functions. So let's say I want to find the average. I just click on the down arrow, click on average, and notice it's giving me an average, but notice what it's doing here. It's adding these extra 2 columns that I don't want. I don't want the total in the average, and I don't want the tax total in the average, do I? So I need to either change that B40 to B38, or somehow move this little, if I can get to the bottom right-hand corner, which as you can see is a little tough to do, I need to move that up a little. Since it is a little difficult, I'm just going to re-highlight what I actually want to average and press enter. And then I can drag it across and get my average. If I want to find the minimum, I can come back up here, go to min. Same thing, drag across what I really want and press enter. That's how easy it is to use some of these functions, okay? What if you don't know what function you want though? One of the things you can do is you can click on this FX, which is insert function, or you can go to here and go to more functions. Those are exactly the same thing. Either way, so I click in the cell where I'd like the function, click on FX, and it will tell me, first of all, it tells me the most recently used functions, the ones I used most recently. But I can also ask to see all functions if I want, or I can just look at a subset, like just financial functions or just logical functions or whatever it is that I'd like to do. I can also come up here if, let's say, I'd like to know how to find an interest rate. I can just start typing in INT and go and see if I see anything for an interest rate. Or, well, this actually says int as in integer for number. So what I meant to do is do something like rate or payment or whatever it is that you're trying to do. Just type it in and it will search for it. Okay? All right. So we've finished doing page 1 and page 2 with AutoSum, summing rows simultaneously. We're doing insert functions on page 5 and the insert tool. The insert tool, which is what I was just on a second ago, is really helpful not only to find something, like for instance, what if instead of trying to add these, notice that this was a total that told me the total of what was in here, but instead, let's say this was a United Way campaign that you were doing, and what you really wanted to know was out of all these cells, who contributed? This person called Cherries didn't contribute, this person called Cones didn't contribute. So instead of doing an equal sum, I want to do a count. Okay, so if I don't know how to do a count, I can click on here. I can type in count, or I can click on count here. It sort of tells me a little bit about the count function here, but but not a lot, right? It says it counts the number of cells that contains numbers, but maybe that's not enough information. So the neat thing is I can click on help on this function, and help in Excel is amazing for these things. Okay, so it gives you a definition of what the count function does. Okay, and then it gives you an example of how to do a count. It even gives you a video of how to do a count. And then down here, it explains what value 1 means. Okay, it says the first item or cell reference or range where you want to count the numbers. Okay, and if you continue down, you'll actually see examples that you can copy into your spreadsheet and see exactly how they work. Like here it says equals count counts the number of cells that contains numbers in cell A2 through A7. So it tells you absolutely everything, and it also gives you related functions. So it's such a helpful thing to use the help function. And to remind you how we got there, we just clicked on the function we wanted to know more about and click on help. Okay, so what we can also do if we just want help with entering the function is we can now double click on count, and it says, okay, I'm going to put in the word count, and I'm assuming that you want to count B36. Let's see if that's right. And it's not. We want B29. Do you see where it says B36? So again, it's only guessing to where it hits the first blank cell. So we want to start up here. So remember, all we have to do is drag. And notice as soon as I start to drag, do you see how the box shrinks up so that you can see your spreadsheet? And as soon as you let go, it comes back down. So you're asking for a count of all cells that have numbers between B29 and B38. And look at that. It even tells you the answer. So you can see, is it correct before you even hit OK? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Whoops. Shouldn't have clicked. But it's exactly right, isn't it? So 8 is the answer here. I'm going to click on OK. And boom, there's the 8. So that's what the count function does. Okay. So the insert function and the help function on the insert box is amazingly helpful. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. So then we're going to go on to a little bit more difficult functions, because all you've learned so far is you've learned how to do functions that basically just take a range. Although let me show you that it doesn't have to just be a range. Remember we did the sum function, and all of our sums have just been one range. Like I'm just adding this and I'm happy with that. But notice that it says number 2. It can be another range. I can put in a comma. Do you notice there's a comma right there? And then do another range, and it'll add that. And I can type in a comma and type in 100, and it'll add that. And I can do a comma and click over here, and it'll add that. So I can have as many different ranges as I would like, and press enter, and it will add all of those different things. Okay? So